and let everybody in. Here comes everyone. And I want to disable waiting. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm sure we're all joining from different time zones. It is good to see you. And thanks for being super on time today. Welcome, settle in, get your glass of water. We should start here in maybe 30 seconds. We can give folks 30 seconds to see who's still joining before we start. Good to see you there, Sarita.
Good evening. Good morning.
Good evening. Thanks for making time to join this session today. It is nice to see all of you. And I think we can start in the interest of time, and everyone who's still on their way will make it at some point, and yeah, they can join us. But yeah, good morning once again, good afternoon, good evening. It is nice to have you join us on this webinar today. We're going to talk about pivoting towards inclusion, making a personal commitment to justice and equity in international education. This is just the third webinar of our IEW series, and we're so glad you could join us today. I would like to introduce what we're going to do today. We'll have, this presentation, we have great speakers who will talk about this topic. We'll have some interactions in breakout rooms, in the chat, on Menti, and we'll have a question and answer at the end. We are going to have the entire presentation on Menti together with some activities, as I already mentioned. So if you already can, please scan the QR code that's on your screen right now. Or you can go to menti.com and enter the code that you can also see on your screen, 28718708, on the bottom left of the screen. Or you can click on the chat. There's a link in the chat that Chris just posted. You can click on that and join the presentation and give us a thumbs up when you're there. I can see some thumbs up already. Thanks for that. So let me quickly let you know what our agenda is for this session. We will go through some introductions today. We'll introduce ourselves, and then we will have a poll on defining our communities. We'll talk about what culture is. We will talk about what white culture is, and then we'll pivot and recognize the whiteness of international education. And we'll have a debrief activity right after that, and followed by a question and answer at the very end. So we will have time to answer all your questions at the end. And now to introduce great speakers for this session today. I will invite Chris to go first.
Hi, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Chris Thompson. I use pronouns. I'm founder of COMPEAR, Global Education Network, right here in the state of North Carolina. I'm also the co-host of the Global Respectful Disruption Summit. And I've been working in international education and the diversity, equity, and inclusion space for about 20 years. Mostly on the higher education side, but more recently also pivoting to study by providers and corporates. So I pretty much won all the hats, including working in ISSS, International Student Scholar Services, English Language Learning. So I moved around in this field, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation with my colleagues. I'm going to pass it over to Katherine.
I'm Katherine. Surname is pronounced Yngve. I use she, her pronouns. I'm coming to you from Purdue University in Indiana in the USA, which was formerly the homelands of the Potawatomi, the Lenape, Lashani, and I think I'm unfortunately forgetting one. In international education, I started out as a study abroad advisor, moving up through a series of shifting my home till I was director of international programs that took place in Lebanon at the American University of Beirut. And I have been in my job now as an institutional researcher. I think one of the few in the US at least that focuses her institutional research on intercultural learning here at Purdue.
Thanks, Katherine. And I am Brian Bright Musioki. I am coming to you live from Nairobi, Kenya. I work at IFS Intercultural Programs. I'm based in Nairobi though, and I work in our learning and development unit. I am a facilitator. I love intercultural learning, and I am so glad to be in this conversation with Chris and Katherine today. Please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat, and most importantly, let us know where you're connecting from. And at this point, I will hand it over to Chris, who will take it over from here.
All right, thank you, Brian. So we want to start with one quick poll. This one is multiple choice, and if you're just joining us, all you need to do is go to menti.com on your phones, or you can open up a new tab on your laptop. Go to menti.com and type in code 28718708. We would just like to know what sector of this field are you working in? Is it education abroad, international education leadership, international enrollment management? Then we also have a teaching and learning scholarship, diversity, equity, inclusion, or is it other? And if you do select other, if you wouldn't mind also telling us in the chat, what other field are you working in? So it looks like so far we have 4 international education, 1 international education leadership. So far education abroad is trending here. We also have some diversity, equity, and inclusion. Thank you for being in this space. And International Student Scholar Services, welcome. Okay, and 2 more. So we are mixed, mostly education abroad. And I see in the chat that we also have someone here who is advocating for working not longer in the field, but still advocating for decolonial futures. Thank you, Hannah, for being here. Linguistics, thank you, Elena, in the chat. All right, so thank you all for sharing one other, I see that, thank you. And if you did put international student accommodations homestay, thank you, Allison, in the chat. And then I'm also just noting where people are tuning in from. Canada, we have India, Shreveport, Louisiana. Okay, great. Okay, we have one more poll that we like for you to do. How do you self-identify? And you can pick your gender, your class, your race, your nationality, any of those. How do you self-identify? Queer, all right. Latinx, white, bisexual. Let's see. And queer, if the word is bigger on the screen, that means we have more than one or more than 2. White passing Latino, okay? Black or African American, Filipino. And we also have female, okay? Fair complexion, All right. Creole, all right. Gay, Honduran, Indian. We have a very diverse mix of folks here. African, US citizen. Okay, we have more women in the room, more folks who are identifying as female here, white and woman. Okay, so, and queer. All right. Give you a few more seconds to get your answers in so we can get a snapshot of who is joining us today. Lebanese. Thank you for being here. Cis female, Southeast Asian, US American, white US, American mama. Cool. Lebanese. All right. So we have quite a diverse mix of folks, and I'm looking forward to seeing what lenses, all of these lenses that you've shared, how they will manifest during our session today. Okay, so we have a community pack that I always like to do in session just to kind of set the tone. So we'd like for you to be present today. We know there's many things grabbing your attention. So please be present throughout today's presentation by being active in the chat. I appreciate all of the chat responses that we've already gotten. And also, you can also show us some love by giving us a thumbs up or a heart in the Mentimeter. That also encourages us to, as facilitators, we can't always see what's going on the other side of the screen. So thank you for all the thumbs ups. Make space, take space. This means, you know, we welcome you to share, but if you've already shared, please encourage someone else to share or make space for someone else. One other one I want to share is what is shared here stays here. What is learned here leaves here. So please take the lessons and leave the stories. We want to make some confidentiality. We're calling everyone in today. We're not calling anyone out. And I think that's a very specific way of educating, learning and unlearning. And so maybe during this process, you might be a little bit uncomfortable. And as one of my mentors said, when you're uncomfortable, it means you're learning. So we want to be comfortable with being uncomfortable today. We might say some things that might be new to you, or it might be something you already know. But what we would like for you to do is to lean into it and ask yourself, what would it mean if this were true for me? And so we can agree to this community pack. If you can just give us a thumbs up. I see we have a couple of thumbs ups already in the Mentimeter. You can give me a thumbs up on the screen. I'm watching your cameras, or you can just say yes in the chat. So we'll give you multiple ways to agree to this community pack, and then we'll move forward with our presentation today. All right, I see the thumbs ups on the screen and in the Mentimeter. And then the last thing I always like to ask before I move on, is there anything else you'd like to add to this community pack? And you can feel free to type that in the chat. Anything else you'd like to add? Okay. All right. Thank you. Pass it over to Katherine.
So what is culture? There are a lot of metaphors for culture, and I'm sure many of you have seen them. I'm fondest lately of this tree, which was developed by Zaretta Hammond, because it reminds us that culture is an ecosystem. It has deep roots. They are many, they are small, they are buried. We can't see them. We also see that coming up and flourishing in the leaves. We can see those in our celebrations, in the way we choose to dress. I'm dressed for the holidays, as you can see here. Those are obvious ways that we can see culture. We can't see if that soil is healthy or poisoned, that the culture is rooted in. We can see when the tree starts to look sickly, and we also have the power to amend that soil, help the tree grow better, and the tree in turn helps us grow better when we do that by producing lots of healthy leaves that create oxygen for us. So we literally live with the tree, with the culture. Next slide, please. I want to, I'm not going to call you out, but I do want to call out whiteness as a culture. It's a dominant cultural space that doesn't have to explain how it works. Everybody knows how white culture works. Many white people, in my experience, don't really know that they have culture. It's other people that have cultures. It's also imaginary. It has no biological or scientific foundation, but because we believe in it, it's a very powerful social construct with very real effects. It is a learned behavior that we have learned as we grow up. Next slide, please. So, whiteness was created so the sons of the white elite would have the power, would be and the privilege. They would be supreme over other peoples and races. And it has 14 characteristics. We are not going to go over all 14 characteristics, but you can find them in the handout by Tema Okun. It's called Divorcing White Supremacy Culture or Characteristics of White Supremacy Culture. But we're going to talk about 3 of them here. Each of us will take one of these and unpack just a little bit for you before we get into discussion, how that plays out in education and in international education. So I'm going to start with worship of the written word. And I grew up in an academic family. My dad was a first-generation student, and our home was filled with books. I remember one of my earliest memories, because Dad was writing his dissertation, was "Be quiet, Daddy has to write." Daddy had to write. He ultimately wrote 13 books, some of which earned him early tenure, all of which supported the family. Our house was filled with books. I think, if you may notice, I changed my virtual background. One way that the written word shows up is that in Zoom, if you have a library in your background, you're seen as more credible. Worship of the written word shows up in international education in a number of ways. For example, you probably have a list, if you are a university, a written list of where your students can and can't study abroad. If the organization or the country is not on that list, it doesn't exist. It's not seen as of quality, and your students can't go there. You probably have memorandum of understanding in order to participate in exchanges and build partnerships. If you don't have a memorandum of understanding, that relationship doesn't exist. It's not real. It's not of value. And there's probably a lot of ceremony, cultural ceremony, whenever you sign a new memorandum of understanding, where the person at the top of the hierarchy has to sit there with a ceremonial pen, and each of them signs it, and you film it, and you put up a big picture of it in your social media. Another way that worship of the written word shows up is that we value people who have these credentials that they gained in higher education. So, for example, in the US, job requirements typically prefer a PhD if you're going to be a senior international officer. PhD is a research degree, shows you how to do research, which is a way of honoring the written word and conforming to how you write knowledge, write down knowledge. If it's not written down, it's not real knowledge. But in fact, the characteristics of what you need to be a successful international office have very little to do with research. Once you've done that dissertation and gotten that PhD, your job's not going to give you any time to do research. But we honor you because you went through that ritual and you got that degree. I'm going to stop now. This is a topic I could talk about for ages. I will just say that when we require a PhD in the US, you can look at those statistics of who has PhDs, and if we require a PhD to show that we're worthy, then we have, even though we didn't mean to maybe, but we have cut out a lot of people who are Black, brown, indigenous. They just are not getting the PhDs, not because there's something wrong with them, but because the PhD was created around the image of whiteness, and our universities, many of them, are not comfortable places for people who so identify. Christina, the next slide is yours, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Katherine. Speaking of that, I just have a quick, I'm actually a doctoral student. I mentioned earlier that I've been around for 20 years. I don't think I need my doctorate, but I have to work within the racialized context and structures that we do have.
Yes.
And I think I kind of kind of, decided just to get that just so that it legitimizes me, even though I
Exactly.
don't feel personally or professionally that I need it. So I can definitely relate to that. And I'm going to talk a little bit about
I
fear
worship
of
you
open
already, Krista.
conflict. This is something,
I worship
yeah,
you already.
exactly, right. Oh, no, thank you. I thought you said something else. Thank you, Katherine. But I was going to talk a little bit about the fear of open conflict, because this is something that I've encountered multiple times throughout my career. And I think it's interesting how this shows up in the international education space as well. And so I'll just talk about a couple of quick points, but in many professional settings, I've often felt pressure for the first point, the emphasis and insistence on being polite, even to your own detriment. I would say setting rules or ideas of information of how different opinions need to be shared in order to be heard. So I remember a particular situation when I had a student that was coming to our program from the continent of Africa. And this student, was supposed to, was not selected to come. They were rejected in the process. And so as I sat down with the selection committee, I said, I just don't understand why, we're not advocating for more students to come to our university from this particular country in Africa. And then someone said, whoa, 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 be calm. Don't get too upset about it. And I was just like asking a question. And so in that very moment, even though to me, I hadn't raised my voice, I hadn't said anything controversial except ask a question. And sometimes I think questioning things also can spear in or feed into this fear of open conflict. And I think that's probably why I'm doing my dissertation research on respectful disruption, which basically focuses on questioning the status quo. But the next part that I'll talk about is the labeling emotion as irrational or anti-intellectual. Also when I've been working in leadership spaces, when I was directing a study abroad program in many different institutions, I also observed that my emotional responses, especially in situations involving racial or cultural insensitivity, were labeled as irrational or don't be angry. But my white counterparts or colleagues were never ever labeled that way. If they were super passionate about something, the word passion was used. But if I was to, really come out and speak out against something, then I was labeled as angry, maybe having an attitude, maybe being irrational. And so I can see how this, and there's a whole entire pedagogy and writing and actual academic writing on the labeling of the angry Black woman. And so that's something that I have experienced. And I think that, it does sometimes cause those who present as I am to really feel uncomfortable in those situations and not necessarily feel heard or valued in those situations. And I think for me, I've always pushed for more advocacy and centering the voices of those who are usually not heard. So I just shared those two examples from my own personal experience. And I would welcome you to think about how this might have shown up for you in some spaces. And I guess I'll pass it over to Brian to talk about the next concept.
Thanks, thanks, Chris. I'll talk about individualism here and what individualism, is. It's, often the concept or, the cultural concept of us thinking we can always make it on our own. And, often denying that we are, interdependent as humans and maybe not denying, but then, not realizing that as humans, we are interdependent and we rely on each other for many things. And I mean, being Kenyan, being, an African, I was raised in a very collectivistic culture, but then, thankfully with experiences to study abroad, I have been exposed to individualistic cultures in education and, what that looks like, which for the most part was a culture shock, in school, expecting to work, in a group with other students and just have it, being about the task but then having it turn into a competition is one of the, minor culture shocks that I experienced on this end. And yeah, individualism basically can manifest itself in, different ways. It could be like I mentioned, some people prefer to work on their own, and, they find it, uncomfortable for them to work in a team, and they don't know how to work as part of a team. They'd rather the teacher gave them assignments, gave us all personal assignments and did not have to work in a group. That strong desire for individual recognition and credit, you all worked in a group, but then, if you had to discuss your work together, someone saying, I, worked on that, or I researched this, and not having it, be a we situation because it was a group project. And valuing competition more than cooperation, like I mentioned, for me was always about cooperation, but then realizing that for some people, it's, valuing that competition. And, it's very connected to one way, which is right, being perfect, and, that defensiveness and denial from time to time. For some people, like for some white people, individualism looks like expecting to be seen as an individual and not as part of the white group, not as part of the larger group that you don't want to associate with. So yeah, that is individualism. That is, my experience with individualism. And I'd like to hand it over back to Chris now.
Thank you, Brian, for breaking that down so nicely. So now we'd like for you all to, we're going to put you in some breakout rooms, some peer huddles, as we like to call them. And I just want to read a quote by Christina Rivera Chapman. She's actually out of Durham, North Carolina, who actually started up a farming co-op. And she said, if I'm good at any of these, she's speaking about white supremacy cultural norms, if I can code switch like a boss, then I just might get lifted up. I might be deemed professional, rational, respectable, intelligent, hardworking, good, worthy, etc. in my job, in my community, family, etc. So we'd like for you all to provide an example of a time when you observed or knowingly, unknowingly participated in one of the characteristics that we said. You don't have to do 4. Just think about one of the 3 that we discussed and how it was applied in your workplace or your community. And then when you get back, we will have an anonymous share back with Mentimeter. So definitely note at least one that was shared in your group so you can share it with the larger group, and we'll just read them out and name them. Okay, any questions about that before we go into our breakout rooms? And we'll go into the breakout rooms for about 6 minutes. Okay. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Brian to get you all in the rooms.
Yep, all rooms are open now. Please accept the invite to join a breakout room. If you're having trouble, please let us know. Chris, are you sharing to breakout rooms now?
Let's see. Let's see if I have that feature on here. Yes, I can share this to the breakout rooms.
Great.
I'm going to do it now. So let me see the slide. That's something I learned recently. Okay, it looks like.
Most people are in breakout rooms already.
Sorry, could I get back in my room? I don't know why.
Sure. I'll move you to a breakout room just now. This is room 7.
Okay, I think everyone is back. Hopefully. But what we'd like for you to do now is maybe provide an example of a time that you observed or knowingly or unknowingly participated in, one of the more of the characteristics that we discussed. And as you're taking some time to get back into Mentimeter, please note that this is very anonymous and we were intentional in doing this so that you would feel safe to share whatever you like to share. But if you would like to share it in the chat, and feel free to do that as well. So we'll give you a few seconds to write up one of your reflections. Okay, we were just talking about that one, using agreements for partnerships. Most of the time, these are very ceremonial. They really don't hold any legal standing, but it just makes us feel better to know that we're in partnership with said university, and it's written down and it's acknowledged. And then someone claimed that our collaborative work was done by him alone, discrediting our collective efforts. Yes, because as Katherine said, there's reward for being individual. You're individually awarded. I don't know if we actually have a really good system. I would speak more in the US context, but also I would say in Western culture of rewarding collectivism or group work. Usually there's always one person that's a team lead. They usually do that. Definitely currently be Palestine, so much calm down, a total unacknowledgement. Thank you for sharing that. I would say definitely if you are the person that's raising an issue that's harming you, a lot of the times you're asked to calm down even at your own detriment. Colleagues stating that people I work with in Nicaragua do not have the knowledge because it's an oral tradition. Yes, I've worked with so many programs that have also have a similar story, and that they feel like that the fact they don't have all the rules and policies written down, that it's not valid. But there's a very strong oral tradition of passing down skills and knowledge. Negotiating cultural values, embracing both individual and collectivism in biracial families, biracial partnerships, and bicultural partnerships, sorry. In the US, a white person commits a crime, they're viewed as an individual who has issues. It is not an indictment of all white people. It's different for people of color. Thank you for raising that one too. Absolutely, there's a broad brushstroke that's used for folks, I would say, Black and Brown and Indigenous and other folks. I would also say this also applies to other marginalized communities like the queer community. I know we have quite a few folks in that community here too. Collaboration and agreement, white passing in different areas of work and opportunities of life, often Filipinos are stereotyped, especially those working abroad. When it's hard for a coworker to work as a team, he likes to earn credit alone without giving credit for everybody else. Seeing people of color is violent, provides a reason for over-policing communities of color. People assume you're egotistic because you're comfortable working as an individual, okay? In higher education, if you don't have a PhD or similar, your opinion is not considered valuable, absolutely. Especially when I was director of study abroad, I would also have some issues with faculty members that did not see me as valid because I did not have my PhD at the time. But after they got to know me, I think they actually were able to realize, she does have something, interesting to share, but it took a time to overcome that. Not speaking up about important issues of fear out of conflict. Yeah, making people uncomfortable. I've heard that a lot. These are great. Claiming that I'm not a legitimate fit for the job because I'm a Black woman. My organization prefers neutrality when it comes to polarizing topics. I think this shows fear of conflict, dominant white culture. Ashamed to share thoughts because they might laugh the way you talk. Wow, these great reflections. Thank you so much for sharing and for all of your candor during this conversation. So we're going to move towards pivoting toward inclusion, and I'm going to pass it back over to Katherine.
Great. When we're confronted with systemic racism, and we are always confronted with systemic racism, I'm not going to say it's not pretty much everywhere in the world. It can often seem impossible to make a difference? How can I possibly make a difference? And the answer to that is together we can make a difference, but also that we don't have to burn it all down tomorrow, even though we'd like to. Small pivots away from that competitiveness or whatever it might be can really be a way to soothe your soul and to do it in partnership with others and begin to make a movement. So what's our next slide, Christina?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the spheres of influence. I think it's very good.
Okay.
And then feel free to jump in. This graphic I really like. When Katherine and I were working on this presentation with Brian, we wanted to kind of give you a visual. And I think I like this one because it talks about self. And I think that absolutely you have most control of yourself. And I think when we're thinking about our spheres of influence, it's a range. Individually, our sphere of influence, can be, we can most control our own actions, our own words, our own decisions. And then, then it kind of, the next sphere that we have is our partner and our children, our extended family, our friends and our neighbors and our personal acquaintances. Work's actually a little bit further out than we think. Work is further out. It's the people that we don't have that personal connection with, but we still can influence. And then after that becomes, social networks, government, and then we have, interactive networks and service providers, perhaps. But I think what's interesting here is that, collectively, our sphere of influence really does expand significantly when we work as a collective. As individuals, we actually have quite a small sphere of influence if we look at the bottom. We may be able to affect the people who actually love us and care about us, but then it dissipates as we go out. So I follow, as I mentioned earlier, a pedagogy called respectful disruption. And the first concept of it is to question the status quo, but it also means, if I was to define respectful disruption in a few words, I would say it's unity over division. So it's really focusing on the collectiveness for us to work together as a group to change. So I'll give you an example. When I was working in a smaller college, I was, kind of protesting our GPA policies. Basically, at the end of the day, any of the students that wanted to go abroad, they had to have a certain GPA. That was the main thing. So I questioned that policy. And then as an individual, I would work with students to ensure that, help them to overcome that in the ways that I could. But I met a small group of international educators who also disagreed with this policy. And as a collective, we were able to actually change the policy with many of our study abroad providers. We actually worked together as a collective and was able to influence our partnerships and have them to look at it like, is GPA really that important, especially if the student's still in college, they're in good standing at their institution. Can we work together, to ensure that students have more options and more, there's more programs available to them. And so through this collective group, a small but mighty group, we were able to actually change policies with a couple of our provider partners. So I think it's important to think about, how collectivism, how individualism is impactful, but how collectivism can actually expand our sphere of influence. And that's what I was going to add. Katherine, you have anything else to join in, or Brian?
I do want to, I love this spheres of influence because it tells us that we can act together. I do want to honor the comment we had in the chat that the graphic seems to assume that people must have a partner or must have children. And that isn't always the case, although most of us have family or extended family or adopted family. So I do want to honor that. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I think you have maybe your blood family than your chosen family, which I say is as powerful
Sure.
or impactful as your maybe related family. Absolutely. So I'm going to pass it back to you, Katherine, so we can get into our action planning.
We're going to give you a tool on the next slide, and we'd like to spend the remaining time calling ourselves to action. And so acting together to form a strategy, an objective, to collaborate, and to act. That's what we need to do to overpower white supremacy little by little. If you go to the next slide, Christina, a handout that I have found There we go. The white supremacy culture pivots worksheet. Brian has dropped it into the chat. Asked you to look at, on the left hand, there's a list of those white supremacy characteristics. Some of them have different names. And on the right side is a different kind of action. And it asks you to commit. I'm asking you to commit in at least one of those spaces. Chris and I and Brian are asking you to commit in at least one of those spaces. Something you might be able to do to pivot from harmful norms to liberatory practices, to select an accountability partner, and eventually to share your journey in 2 weeks in the Global Respectful Disruption LinkedIn group. So we're going to, I'm going to do it, Chris is going to do it, Brian's going to do it. He doesn't know it, but he's going to do it. You're going to do it. Say, okay, here's one small change I can make by Christmas. And I have an accountability partner. Maybe it's my spouse, or maybe I'm going to name Chris as my accountability partner, or I'm going to do this. And in that space, we can also begin to talk about what we have done, or what we thought was a reasonable goal, and can you help me figure out how to get there? Do we have a moment, Chris, in our time schedule? Looks like we've got maybe 15 minutes. We could have small group discussion, or we could have Q&A.
I was thinking maybe this time, Brian, maybe we can do 6 minutes in the breakouts, and then we can bring everybody back to the Q&A, so you have time to also make your announcements as well. But maybe for the next 6 minutes, just get started on the worksheet that Katherine just alluded to, and I'll share this slide to the breakout rooms as well, so you'll be able to see the instructions. Just to start a conversation, and hopefully maybe there's someone in your group that can be your accountability partner.
Great. All breakout rooms are open now. Please accept the invite and join your room.
Very intensive 2 weeks, I must say, Brian, for you. You need rest.
I'm done with
You just
Zoom.
need to pick one thing, one thing.
Je pourrais te l'envoyer si tu veux.
Mais franchement,
Ça a l'air hyper intéressant.
Je suis en
I
train de
think everyone's back now, Chris. Yeah.
Oh
everybody's
yes, welcome back everyone. I'm going to actually, just for time's sake, since we just have a few minutes left, we wanted to leave some time for Q&A. But I guess my question to you all is, how was this activity? Katherine and I were just talking about it. Did you feel like you could pick one thing to work on? I'm just going to unshare my slides now, and then we can just talk about it. So thank you all.
Great. Do we have any, thoughts, questions, anything that came up in your small groups that you'd like to share? Questions to Chris or Katherine? Yeah, this is the time.
Well, to be honest, in our group, which is Stephen and Stephanie, we took all the minutes to read. So we actually didn't have the time, or like the proper conversation.
Un thumbs up. Non, je voulais faire genre.
Yeah, it's a lot. And did think about giving you only 3 or 4 things to choose from, but on the other hand, options are good. So thank you for absorbing the materials, taking that time.
And to add to that, I think what came up to me is the thing that appealed to what we can change individually rather than our organizations. So as you read the thing that, okay, probably I have done that. probably have been in a situation where I should have reacted, but I did not respond in a way that. So yeah, those things come readily, and it enriches the way we will continue to act as we encounter situations like this.
Right. Yeah, because self is the most, what you have most influence over yourself, and
Yeah.
so that's the easiest place and the most, concrete place to start. I absolutely agree. And then I think it takes more time to organize, because collectivism and group action takes organization. It takes finding people with shared values and goals and things like that. And so I think that does take more time. And then I wonder, I guess I leave you with a question. How can we then move past, move from individual action, which is very impactful, but it's such a small sphere of influence, to more collective action? Because I agree that, a lot of times I think one of the reasons why we continue in this maybe cycle is that we don't have the time or the resources to organize.
But we can tell one friend, we probably all have one friend or one family member, whether it's at work, whether it's in the community, that we could share these thoughts with.
I see Evelyn has her hand up. Go ahead, Evelyn.
Hi. So one thing that I thought about, just kind of work related in terms of individualism, I know a lot of times and typically in workplaces we'll have like individual evaluations where you're kind of looking at the goals, whether you met goals, how you can improve upon them, which I think is helpful. I'm not saying it's not helpful. I think it is very helpful to have those individual type of evaluations. But because so much of what we do is working together as a team, it might be also helpful to have a similar kind of, not necessarily evaluation, but just a team reflection where we're thinking about, okay, so how well did we work together as a team? Did we feel supported? Did we feel like when you needed something that we were able to be there to help you when your load was too heavy, or, and so really being able to create that space where we just take the time and reflect, like, how can we be better teammates for one another so that we can reach this collective goal that we have? And so that might be, an additional way that in the work environment, we can kind of not move completely away from the individual evaluation, but focus more on the team dynamics, because at the end of the day, that's when the work gets done, when we're working together.
Thank you for that, Elena. Evelyn, I'm reminded that one of the teams I've worked on, we try to have regular things where we appreciate one another to create those collective bonds of having worked together. Sarita?
I always feel all good things start with an individual and then they become an example. So if you do, or like my little friend, young friend Tuhu, and was talking about when they were in Japan and how she helped an Indian student to get friends so she could convince. So what I mean is, first, set an example. You yourself should do. And I also agree with the last speaker that Evelyn was saying that individualism, you respect, yes. But at the same time, when you are working in a community, you cannot be all by yourself. You have to have a team. And when you have a team, you have to respect diversity. You have to have inclusion, and then only proper engagement to your work can occur. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarita. I think the example you gave was an excellent one of not hoarding power. Power hoarding is another one of those examples of white supremacy culture, but you talked about how they helped another student. That's using your power in a collectivist way. That's really important. Amparo, I think you have.
Yes, I think it's very important, the individual evaluation, but the same people have a different different skills and capacities, but the evaluation in the group permit observe the progress and the progress in the other context, but it's different the individual and the groupal. But I think I have a mix for the evaluation in the multicultural group. I think, my opinion.
Thank you.
Well, I know Brian has an announcement he wants to make, so and we are at time. But I thank you all so much for your comments and starting this conversation. I hope to see many of you on LinkedIn continuing the conversation and sharing your commitments. And the hardest thing about this work, I think, is actually just getting folks to follow up. So let's please make a commitment to do that. I'm gonna drop the link one more time. And then I'm gonna pass it over to Brian to wrap us up for today.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks everyone for being here. I know we never have enough time to talk about all the great things we want to mention. But yeah, thanks for being here. This session will be recorded and the recording will be on the AFS YouTube page. But I do want to share with you really quickly a couple things before we all go. The first thing is just draw your attention to the AFS Youth Assembly. So please join us at the 2024 AFS Youth Assembly in New York City between August 16th and 28th, 2024. You can find all details on www.youthassembly.org. And the next thing that I want to mention is we still have more IEW sessions. We have one more at 9 p.m. EST today, and we have 4 more happening on Thursday and Friday, excuse me. You can find all this information and the links in the chat in the link that I just shared in the chat. You can register to all those sessions. And of course, thank you so much for coming. If you have any questions or comments after this, please do send them to education@afs.org and connect with us on our socials on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook, AFS Intercultural Programs, or AFS on Twitter.
Thank you, Brian. Actually, I didn't say much about in this meeting, but thank you everyone. Who organizes this meeting and this kind of things. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. And yeah, we've come to the end of our webinar today. Thanks for coming. We hope you all learned something today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.